A billionaire CEO climbed into his limousine after a long day, expecting silence and comfort. But instead, he was met with something no one had ever dared to say to him. A little black girl, no older than 7, looked him straight in the eyes and shouted, "Shut up!" At first, he was furious, confused. How could a child speak to him like that? But what she told him next would shake him to his core and change his life forever. This is the story of how one small voice silenced a powerful man and taught him the lesson money could never buy. Shut up. That single phrase cut through the air like a knife. Nathan Wallace, the billionaire CEO, known for commanding boardrooms and silencing competitors with a single glance, froze as he slid into the back seat of his black limousine. He had just finished a high-profile meeting in the city and expected the usual ride home. Quiet, efficient, no surprises. But this time, something was very, very different. Across from him sat a small black girl, maybe 7 years old, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her little face full of defiance. She didn't flinch when she said it. Her voice wasn't timid or playful. It was sharp, firm, and full of frustration. Nathan blinked, wondering if he'd misheard. He was a man who lived in a world of respect and power. No one employees, politicians, journalists, no one dared speak to him like that. And yet, here was this tiny stranger, looking him dead in the eye and telling him, the Nathan Wallace, to shut up. "Excuse me?" Nathan finally said, his deep voice echoing in the enclosed space of the limousine. "Do you even know who I am?" But the girl didn't back down. She narrowed her eyes, lifted her chin slightly, and replied with a stubborn certainty far beyond her years. "I don't care who you are. You're too loud, and people are already having a bad day out there. So, shut up." For a brief moment, Nathan didn't know how to react. He glanced at his driver through the rearview mirror, silently demanding an explanation. The driver looked just as confused, his hands tightening on the steering wheel, but he stayed quiet. Nathan tried again, this time softer. "Where's your mother? Your father? How did you even get in this car?" But instead of answering, the little girl pulled out a small, worn notebook from her backpack and started writing furiously. The sound of her pencil scratching across the page was the only noise in the limo. Nathan, used to having every room hang on his words, sat there in stunned silence, waiting. Finally, she tore out a page, shoved it toward him, and said, "Read." Messy, childlike handwriting were the words. "People talk too much. Nobody listens." Nathan's heart skipped. For the first time in years, the man who always had something to say didn't know what to say at all. Nathan sat frozen, the crumpled piece of notebook paper still in his hand. The words, "People talk too much. Nobody listens," echoed in his mind like a bell he couldn't unring. Who was this child? And why was she sitting in his limousine, speaking to him as if he were just some ordinary man on the street? "Listen here, young lady," Nathan began, his tone clipped but not angry. "I don't know how you ended up in this car, but this is not a place for little girls to play games." The driver's eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror, silently asking if he should pull over. But Nathan held up his hand, signaling him to keep driving. Something inside told him this wasn't a simple case of a lost child. There was purpose behind this little girl's presence, and Nathan, despite his pride, was curious. The girl, whose name he still didn't know, leaned back against the leather seat, clutching her backpack. She gave him a look that wasn't fearful, but tired, as though she'd had this conversation 100 times before with adults who didn't believe her. "You ask too many questions," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "You think talking will fix everything, but it doesn't." Nathan's brows furrowed. "Then tell me, what does fix everything?" The girl looked down at her shoes, worn-out sneakers with loose laces, before answering, "Listening." That single word hit Nathan harder than any hostile takeover, any corporate betrayal, any scathing news headline ever had. "Where's your mother?" He asked again, but this time his voice softened. Still, she didn't answer. Instead, she pulled her notebook close, flipped a few pages, and showed him sketches she had drawn. On one page, a sad little house with cracks in the roof. On another, stick figures of a woman carrying heavy bags and 2 children beside her. Beneath the pictures were words, spelled imperfectly, but painfully clear. "Nobody listens to us." Nathan felt a strange weight pressing against his chest. He'd sat across from presidents and billionaires, but never had he been confronted with something so raw, so real. This girl wasn't in his car by accident. She had a message. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Wallace, the man known for his unstoppable voice, realized he was meant to be silent. For the first time in years, Nathan Wallace didn't know what to say. He was always the one holding power in conversations, guiding deals, persuading investors, controlling every narrative. But now, sitting across from a little girl with a tattered notebook, he felt something unusual. He felt small. Taking a deep breath, he asked again, "Layla," because by now she had finally introduced herself. "What makes you so sure I don't listen?" Layla didn't hesitate. She turned her gaze out the tinted window, watching the city blur by, and then spoke in a voice that was steady, but far too heavy for a child her age. "Because people like you don't care about people like us. My mom works 3 jobs. She cleans offices at night, she works in a diner during the day, and she still comes home tired, smiling for me and my brother. But no matter how hard she works, we never get ahead. We're always behind on rent, always worried the landlord's going to kick us out." Her small fists clenched around her notebook. "My mom went to ask for help once. She filled out a bunch of forms at some office. They said they'd review her case, but nothing happened. Nobody called back. Nobody even cared. People just talk. They say they'll fix things, but they don't. And while they talk—" She paused, her voice cracking slightly. "We're the ones who suffer." Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. He was used to numbers and reports, to abstract statistics about poverty rates and housing crises. But hearing it from a child, so directly, stripped away the coldness of data. This wasn't a chart on a boardroom slide. This was real life. "And the doctors," Layla continued, her voice growing sharper. "My little brother has asthma. Sometimes he can't breathe. My mom takes him to the hospital, and we sit there for hours. Hours. Nobody listens. They just keep saying, 'Wait your turn.' But what if his turn comes too late?" Nathan leaned forward, his face softening. For once, he wasn't thinking like a CEO. He wasn't calculating costs or strategies. He was simply listening. "Layla," he said quietly, "what do you want me to do?" Her answer was simple, but it carried the weight of a truth Nathan had forgotten long ago. "Stop talking. Just listen." That's the first step. For the first time in years, Nathan Wallace sat in silence, not the calculated silence he used in boardrooms to intimidate rivals, but the kind of silence that comes when you realize you don't have the answers. Layla's words lingered in his mind like an echo. "Stop talking. Just listen." It struck him, because it was the exact opposite of the world he lived in. In his business empire, people fought to be heard. Executives shouted over each other in meetings. Politicians at fundraising dinners promised solutions louder than their opponents. Even Nathan himself had built his reputation on being the voice of vision, a man who never stopped talking about the future. But now, a 7-year-old had just shown him the flaw in all of it. Talking without listening was just noise. And he had been part of that noise for far too long. So for once, Nathan leaned back against the leather seat and said nothing. He folded his hands, gave a small nod, and let Layla continue. At first, she seemed surprised by his silence, as though she didn't quite trust it. But then her words began to flow, faster and more freely. She told him about her school, a place where the roof leaked whenever it rained, where broken windows were covered with cardboard, and where the playground swings had been broken for years. She told him about her younger brother, Marcus, who carried an inhaler everywhere, but often had to go without medicine because her mom couldn't always afford it. She described the nights when Marcus coughed so badly he couldn't sleep, and her mom sat by his bed crying quietly, thinking Layla didn't notice. Every detail made Nathan feel heavier. He had seen cities from penthouse suites, from private jets, from stages where he delivered speeches about progress. But Layla was showing him a different city, one hidden in plain sight, one he had ignored. And the strangest part? He realized he didn't want to interrupt her. He didn't want to correct her, defend himself, or offer quick solutions. He just wanted to keep listening. Because for the first time in his life, Nathan Wallace, the man who always spoke, was beginning to hear. When the limousine finally slowed to a stop, Nathan looked out the tinted glass and felt his stomach sink. Layla's neighborhood looked nothing like the polished streets he was used to. The sidewalks were cracked, trash cans overflowed on the corners, and old apartment buildings leaned tiredly against one another. Children played in the street, dodging potholes and broken glass. A place forgotten by the world. Nathan had passed by neighborhoods like this countless times, usually with the windows up and his phone pressed to his ear. But this time was different. This time, he was seeing it through Layla's eyes, and he couldn't unsee it. Before she opened the door to leave, Nathan reached out. "Layla," he said firmly, "you were right. I don't listen enough, but today I listen to you. And I promise not just with words, but with action. I'm going to do something about it." She squinted at him, skeptical. "People always say that," she muttered. Nathan gave a faint smile. "Then watch me. You told me to shut up, and I finally did. Now it's my turn to show you what happens when someone listens." Layla hesitated, then gave a small nod before stepping out of the car and disappearing into her building. For days afterward, Nathan couldn't shake her voice. In the quiet of his penthouse, in the middle of corporate meetings, even during award ceremonies, her words echoed. Stop talking. Just listen. And so he acted. Within weeks, Nathan launched a community initiative unlike anything his company had ever done. But instead of just writing a check, he did something radical. He set up open forums where families, teachers, and children could speak directly about their needs. He didn't send executives to take notes. He sat in the front row himself and listened. He poured millions into repairing schools, funding free clinics, and creating safe housing. But more importantly, he created systems where communities had the power to decide what they needed most. Months later, at the ribbon cutting of a renovated school, Nathan stood on stage before cameras and reporters. But before speaking, he looked to the front row where Layla sat with her mother and brother and said, "This little girl taught me the greatest lesson money can't buy. She told me to shut up. And because of that, I finally learned to listen." The crowd erupted in applause. And for the first time in his career, Nathan Wallace didn't feel like just a CEO. He felt human. And that's how one little girl taught a billionaire the greatest lesson of his life, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen. If this story inspired you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories just like this. Your support helps us keep bringing these life-changing stories to you.